Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right, wonderful. My name is Cheryl Green. I am the hybrid coordinator for Wild Ones Wayne County. We are going to go ahead this week and jump right into our presentation. Cheryl English, Advanced Master Gardener from Wayne County, is joining us to discuss woodland wildflowers. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the microphone on over to her.
I might have done something wrong.
You hold this part.
Okay.
Look at that part.
Yeah, put that on.
I will put these right there. There you go.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Can we confirm that they can hear me?
Checking now. It takes a minute for them to type
Mhm.
something up, but yeah. Yes, they can hear
Okay,
you.
yay, okay. Technology. It's been a long time since I did a hybrid program, so this is like getting my land legs back or my sea legs back, one or the other, can't, not sure which one. By way of introduction, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Cheryl English. I'm an advanced master gardener out of Wayne County. I attained my basic certification in 2001 and my advanced certification in 2003. I'm also a master composter out of Macomb County. I attained that certification in 2011. I'm actually formally educated as an art historian and an archaeologist. I have a bachelor's degree from Michigan State and a master's from Cornell. I actually am self-employed as an artist. I make garden-inspired pottery, especially habitat-oriented pieces. I have a small selection of my work with me this evening for your delectation. And I'm also an educator. I teach pottery classes and workshops. I do educational programs relating to gardening exclusively now through topics relating to habitats and native plants. And I'm also a gardener. And my focus as a gardener is exclusively helping my clients, my customers to begin to initiate or expand their utilization of native plants in their landscapes to establish or expand habitat. One of your members is a friend and a client of mine, so it's really great to be here with Wild Ones of Wayne County. This November, we're going to be doing a presentation called Living Gems, Woodland Wildflowers. So we're going to be mostly speaking about what we call spring ephemerals. These are plants that emerge in the spring and they flower and then they go to sleep. So let's get started. How are we going to handle questions, Shell?
Questions will be handled, usually we do them after the presentation and I rotate between questions in the room and questions online. I do ask that our virtual participants keep your microphone muted until the question and answer. And then when it's your turn to ask your question, you can go ahead and either unmute and ask your question verbally or type it into the chat. Also, for folks in the room, I ask that you give me a few minutes time to go ahead and transcribe the question that you're asking so that the virtual attendees can understand being asked. And I will also type in the answer because sometimes that gets a little muffled.
All right, thank you. All right. So I'm going to turn away now because I have notes that I want to be able to use. So the people who are here, not that I don't like you. Okay. So what we're talking about primarily spring ephemerals, and these are plants that emerge in the spring, they flower, they photosynthesize, and then they go dormant for the rest of the garden season, repeating the same process each year. They're often characterized by fleshy roots, things like bulbs, corms, rhizomes. And the seed heads are often the only evidence later in the season, though this is not always the case. Many Michigan gardeners think of daffodils, tulips, hyacinths, and these are spring ephemerals. But they are following they're reacting to a different dynamic than here with our native plants. These plants that we typically think of as spring wildflowers are actually from places in the Mediterranean basin, the Caucasus Mountains, etc. And they are characterized by a cool, moist spring, followed by a hot, dry summer. They don't generally do well in wet conditions, which it makes the fact that the Netherlands or the Low Countries is a major source for these kinds of plants, pretty interesting, being one of the wetter areas in the world. But the ones that we have here are actually responding to a different dynamic. But it's the same basic plan. I'm going to do what I need to do when the conditions are most amenable, and then I'm going to sleep through the hard time that would be harder for me to be productive. And that way I'm going to conserve my energy to be able to do that again on an annual basis. So our native spring ephemerals and things that include species such as Trillium. We have many species of Trillium native to Michigan, bloodroot, Virginia bluebells, jack in the pulpit, etc. And so these are plants that we typically find in deciduous woodlands. In Michigan, the two primary forest contexts that we have here are hickory oak and beech maple. And these are both characterized by deciduous trees, trees that defoliate in the fall. We're seeing the last legs of that now, and then leaf out in the spring after the winter's over. So there is this period of time in the spring before that canopy fills in where there's a lot of sunlight, and these plants emerge, do their thing, and finish doing that as the canopy closes in, as those trees are leafing out. An important structure on some of these plants is something called an elaiosome, and this is attached to the seed, and it consists of high caloric oils. So it's a very attractive food source for ants. They'll often take the seed into the ant nest. They will harvest the elaiosome, and then they will put the seed out in the midden or waste pile associated with the nest. And this is ideal germination context. High humus, perfect for germination of seed. And this is a really critical seed dispersal strategy, one of many seed dispersal strategies that our native plants have. And this is why you might find, I have in my garden at my house, I have planted bloodroot in a certain place, and it emerged 20 feet away because of this dynamic. The ants took the seeds, harvested the elaiosome, and dumped the seed out in the middle of my prairie bed. In terms of landscape application, you're going to want to interplant these with later blooming species to keep the season going. And if you're going to be putting in other plants later in the season, once these may have disappeared, you might want to consider marking where they are so you don't disturb them. Stick a chopstick in or something, just so you know where those things are that you put in the ground, so you don't damage them later if you're putting in other types of perennials. So we're going to talk about some different species here. Anemonella thalictroides, rue anemone. I talk about DWFs, damn white flowers. There's a lot of white flowers in the spring in our native species. And that is because the pollinators that are active during that time do not have color vision. They're flies. So having pretty petals isn't functional, isn't necessary, because the bees aren't awake yet. And the bees are the ones that have the wider visual field. Okay. So you see a lot of white flowers early in the season because they're being pollinated by fly species. Anemonella thalictroides has actually gone through a few names. I think it's on its third name now. This is the name I first learned it from. And then it became, then they did some DNA, they do the DNA sequencing thing, and they decided it was actually a thalictrum or a meadow rue, like early meadow rue or tall meadow rue. So they changed it to Thalictrum thalictroides. And the rule is that when you reassign a plant to a different genus, you maintain the second part of the scientific name, what we call the epithet, because you got to keep something the same. The interesting thing about choosing to give it the decision to put it in that genus is that the epithet for this species actually means meadow rue-like. So the name actually translated to the meadow rue-like meadow rue for a while. And now it's been changed to another name that I have to track down because they oftentimes change things back and forth. We'll talk a little bit more about that dynamic. This is actually a plant that can persist for quite a while if it's happy. You can develop a nice little stand of it. It's quite petite. You can sometimes get a little bit of a rose pink color in the petals, blooming from spring to early summer. Probably one of our best known native plants, Erythema triphyllum or Jack in the Pulpit. Another species in this genus, Erythema dracontium or green dragon, is more summer blooming. This is the better known of the two. This is in the aroid family, so it's typified by the typical aroid structure with the spathe, which is what we would call the pulpit, and then the jack, which is the spadix in the center, which is actually where the flowers are born. Jack in the pulpits and green dragons are, and other aroids actually are quite interesting plants because they're actually pretty much, they function as they actually function as transgender. So if you have a really robust Jack in the pulpit, it's actually likely to be a Jane in the pulpit. And it will be the female flowers that are viable, and she will get pollinated by a smaller plant that doesn't have the energy to produce fruit, because the most energy consuming process for any given species is to produce seed. So you need to have a lot of energy. And there's only one species I know of that makes babies when it can't afford it, and it's not a plant species. So a more robust plant has the resources to be able to bear seed and not diminish because of it, not die, okay? And the next year, that plant will probably be functionally male because it will not have the resources to go through that process again the next year, maybe the year after that. So this is basically functioning as a transgender plant. Really interesting variation within this species. The spathe can often be maroon or almost brown on the outside, sometimes truly chartreuse colored. So lots of variation in the coloring of this efflorescence. Claytonia virginica, spring beauty. I live in Detroit on the east side, and there's a park near me called Baldock Park, which I go to every once in a while. And it's a pretty interesting little place. There's an oak savanna in there, and then there's a little fenced-in area called the Aspen Trail, where there are no aspens at all. There's a lot of maples and hickories, but there's no aspens. There's a lot of spring beauty in that oak savanna, along with some yellow trout lily and violets and other species. Claytonia virginica is pretty interesting because although it's rather subtle, it's one of those native plants that does have some variation in the color of the flower, and it can vary from being, in this case, almost pure white with those nice pink nectar guides. The lines are called nectar guides, and what they are there for is to guide the pollinators to where the nectar and pollen are located. And they can also range to being more and more pink. And there's a suggestion that by having this variation within the population, it maximizes its opportunities for pollination success. Blooms in the spring, has kind of slightly thick, it's kind of grassy foliage, but it's a little thicker than a grass blade. And then it will just disappear once it's done and gone to seed. Dicentra cucularia, Dutchman's breeches. We also have Dicentra canadensis, which is squirrel corn. Squirrel corn doesn't seem to be as amenable to garden culture as Dutchman's breeches. It's a very petite plant. It's called Dutchman's breeches because the flowers look a little bit like a pair of pants hung on a clothesline upside down. There's also a Dicentra exemia, which is a bleeding heart, which is not native to Michigan, but I think it would be considered a near native. Lovely ferny foliage. it's not a particularly vigorous plant in my yard. I might not have the optimal conditions. All of these photographs were actually taken by my friend Don Schulte in my garden. So these are plants that I have grown and have experience with and have enjoyed the opportunity to appreciate in my yard in Detroit. Dodecathian media, Eastern shooting star. I actually ran into this plant before I was really interested in native plants. And I had managed to acquire a pink flowering individual, but I had no idea what I had really. And I haven't been able to find a pink one that's been viable since I lost that one, much to my regret. The common name is pretty obvious. The flowers reflects down and look like it could also be called the badminton plant, I suppose, because they do kind of look like shuttlecocks. I have not found viable pink lineages of this plant that have done well in my yard at all. They seem to be much less vigorous than the white flowering form. Sun to light shade, moist soil, woods and meadows, pretty wide range where you find it. Lovely basal foliage with this efflorescence that comes up with multiple flowers. I mentioned trout lily. This is one of the 2 species of trout lily in Michigan, Erythronium albidum. This photograph, I have to admit, is not taken at my house. It's actually taken on Belle Isle, where there is a wildflower path that has, I'm not sure what the status of it is now, since the DNR took over the island. And even before that happened, when we had a lot of loss from ash borer, because there was a lot of ash, including pumpkin ash, which is of course the largest native ash. Remnant species like pawpaw, not, it's not something that should be growing here, and it was. I don't know if there's any pumpkin ash left. And then it was followed hard on by sudden oak wilt. Or, I'm sorry, sudden oak death. There's 2 different pathogens. Sudden oak death, which devastated a lot of the oaks on Belle Isle, including in this area. So what's happened is a lot of the canopy has been decimated and the shrub layer is asserting itself. We're seeing succession in action. And this is impacting the wildflower, the wildflower layer. Before any of that arboricultural disaster unfolding, a lot of these plants were pretty hard to come by until they rounded up the fallow deer that were running on the island. Fallow deer are actually a European species that were brought in and had been on the island for a long time and actually had evolved into a rather diminutive form of the species because of the constrained context. When they finally decided to pen them up, and I don't know if any of them are still left, it was extraordinary. When I first came in here after that happened, there were swaths of white trout lily blooming. As far as the eye could see, it was amazing and mind-boggling to see this, how persistent they were in spite of the pressure they were under for so long. The white is the less common. Again, I haven't gotten back to Belle Isle in a while because when I went back there, the DNR had taken the path that was about 4 feet wide and widened it to an asphalt access wide enough to take a truck, which really disrupted the hydrology in the area, along with these losing all the canopy. I was totally lost. All the landmarks that I knew were gone, and it was actually kind of upsetting for me to go in there. The other species of Erythronium americanum, is yellow trout lily. This was actually photographed in my garden. And you can see I think more clearly the foliage on this plant. It's speckled, it's mottled is a better word, I think, which is the source for some of its common names. It's mottled like the side of a trout. It's also called fawn lily because of this type of marking. It's also called dogtooth violet because the corm looks like a canine tooth. And it's also called adder's tongue because once it goes to seed, the stamen sticks out of the seed pod, the resulting seed pod, like the tongue of an adder. Interesting thing about this plant, you'll notice, you can see very clearly the flower on the left. There are 2 leaves. You will not get a flower on a trout lily that only has 1 leaf, because the plant will not have enough capacity to photosynthesize to replace the diminishment of that form from flowering to survive into the next year. They also tend to be retractile, which means that the root on the corm will pull itself further down into the soil, which makes it harder for the plant to get up, uses more energy to emerge from the soil and photosynthesize, increasing the chances that it'll only have 1 leaf. You often see these in context with where you have a high spring water table, where the water table is high for the period of time this plant is active. We have a high water table in the spring on Belle Isle. We have a high water table at Baldock Park. These are contexts that are part of what we call lake plain prairie, where you have vernal pooling, standing water in the spring. This is one of the most threatened environments on the planet, lake plain prairie, because it's particularly amenable to human settlement. Which makes the fact that we have white trout lily on Belle Isle all the more amazing. If you have this plant in your garden and you don't tend to have a high water table in the spring, the way you can maybe cheat a little bit is lay a paver or a slab of flagstone or something underneath where you're putting that plant further down, so it can't go any further down and it's got stuck, forcing it to put those 2 leaves out, hopefully. Hepatica acuta loba, sharp-lobed hepatica. This is a plant that's gone, I talked something about the scientific nomenclature. This is a plant that's gone back and forth in terms of the naming. For a while, for a long time, it was Hepatica acuta loba. Hepatica refers to the fact that the leaves on this plant are 3-lobed, and it goes back to this concept called the doctrine of signatures. When human beings were trying to figure out how things worked, and they decided that plants that resembled human body parts must be good for those body parts. So our livers are 3-lobed. The plant, okay, walnuts, they're good for your brain because they look like your brain, okay? That's one of the other ones. So hepatica, because the leaves are 3-lobed, they're like, oh, that's going to be good for your liver. So you think about hepatica, hepatitis, okay, it all like sometimes makes sense. So it was hepatica acuta loba. Then they decided with their DNA sequencing that it was actually an anemone. And then they decided, no, it's actually hepatica. So sometimes it's a little hard to keep up. And one of the reasons I don't change my slides back and forth is to tell these stories about how we are trying to manage, understand, come to grips, categorize these organisms with which we, are becoming more and more familiar. These are not big plants. I think I actually have Americana. Let's see here. They're not real tall, 3 to 6 inches tall. The other species that is native to Michigan is round-lobed hepatica or Hepatica americana. And I actually have a pretty vigorous colony of this in, of all places, my hell strip. That's also the place I found that my maidenhair ferns will grow. And my tillandsia. It's very strange to me that that's working there, but hey, you don't question this stuff. Typically dark violet blue, that's what I've got in my front yard now. Sharp lobed, the lobes are more pointed than the round lobed. So this is the round lobed hepatica. And I find this persists for a very long time after it's bloomed. At least in my yard, it's very happy. Jeffersonia diphylla. Sometimes the scientific nomenclature is pretty easy to unpack. Diphylla means 2 leaves, and the common name reflects that. This is another damn white flower. This is a flower that lasts a day. And if you miss it, you're gonna be waiting until next year to get that picture. There are some plants that, you know, when I became more familiar with them and learned how they acted, it'd be like my friend Don and I were trying to make a baby or something. You gotta get over here today to take this picture because it's blooming right now. We had the same problem with prickly pear cactus. This plant is so cool. And it really does last just one day. And then you get this wonderful, you can see the center where the ovary is, you get this wonderful sort of urn-shaped seed pod that actually, when it dries out, it's a dehiscent seed. It pops open and it sprays its seed away from the mother plant. This is another way of getting that genetic material away from the parent plant and getting it out wider into the wider environment. And as you can see in the back, you can see the way the leaf is. It's paired leaves. It's actually, I guess, a compound leaf of just 2 leaves. One of the things I like about, or love actually, about Don's images, I wish he was still working, he's retired now, is I find them to be beautiful portraits of these plants. There's, I think, an almost emotional quality to them, but they're also very good botanical images that do a great job describing what we're talking about. Probably one of our better known native wildflowers, Mertensia virginica, Virginia bluebells. This is a pretty big plant, 14 to 20 inches tall. The buds, before they open, are actually pink, and then the flowers open blue. And it's pretty extraordinary because for such a, you know, it has these big cabbagey leaves. And so it's pretty robust when it's in flower and it's photosynthesizing. And then it goes to nothing. And this is one of those plants that if you are going to be doing anything around it later in the season, be sure to mark it. Even the root system is kind of fibrous and, you know, you're like, what is this? There's no, this end is up, you can tell. So it's something that you want to be really careful about disturbing. It's a beautiful thing. I have a friend of mine, during the pandemic, I did a presentation for red cedar wild ones, and I did this presentation, and my friend Elizabeth, or Betty Seagull, asked a question about, you know, why I can't seem to grow this plant. She has a beautiful property in Okemos, and I'm like, you know, you've got skunk cabbage. I will never be able to grow skunk cabbage. I would give up another tooth to grow skunk cabbage, but I can't. So we just have to learn to accept what we can do, and appreciate that, and live vicariously through those who can do other things. Podophyllum peltatum, mayapple. This is another plant like trout lily that if you don't have 2 leaves, you're not going to get a flower. For the same reason, it needs those 2 leaves to be able to photosynthesize and restore the bulb that's expended in the process of flowering and bearing fruit. You have this wonderful single flower, white petals again, and you have that very prominent ovary there, and that's actually going to turn into an apple-like fruit. It's not an apple, but it looks like a little miniature apple, which is edible for humans, but it's particularly prized by box turtles. Box turtles love mayapple. And box turtles are a very vulnerable species because they do not tolerate relocation. They do not roam in their lifetimes beyond a very small territory, and removing them from that territory means that they are forever lost. Sanguinaria canadensis, bloodroot. Another very diminutive plant, another damn white flower. And very similar to, I think that the flower itself looks very similar to the twin leaf, but the form of the plant is completely different. The flower actually emerges from the unfurled leaf. It's a single leaf. That's the flower stem emerges from that unfurled leaf, the furled leaf, sorry, and it blooms, and then the leaf unfurls around it. I've made some pottery using almost spent bloodroot leaves. It's an extraordinarily beautiful leaf to work with. It's called bloodroot because the root actually has a reddish sap that was used as medicine and for cosmetics by the indigenous cultures. There is a naturally occurring double form. Unfortunately, it is not as vigorous as the single form and doesn't usually persist for very long, but you can see a little bit of that leaf unfurling. This is a plant that the ants moved to the middle of my prairie bed. Trillium erectum. We have, I think, 10 to 12 Trillium species native to Michigan. This is called the wake robin, also called the bloody butcher. I didn't know why it was called bloody butcher. I thought it just had to do with the color red. It actually has to do with the fact that it's got a rather unpleasant odor and it is pollinated by flies. So the name bloody butcher makes a lot of sense with knowing that. Trillium are divided into two groups. And I can never remember the one of them, but I can remember the other. There's the one group that has the flower is on a stem that comes above the leaves, and the leaves are solid green. And wake robin and great white trillium fall into that category. The other category, let's talk. This is the great white trillium, which is probably the best known trillium species in Michigan. And often I remember when Don took this picture, it was under a yew tree that I have in my backyard. It's the only thing that's remaining from when I moved in. And he was down there on the ground. He had all the leaf litter in his hair. And, this is a person who's dedicated to his art. And as this flower ages, it actually will take on a pink cast. Somewhat like we see with white flowering hydrangeas, for example, and there's some other white flowers as they age, they get a little pinkish hue to them. The other classification is the sessile form, in which the flower is held tight against the leaves, and the leaves are mottled. So yellow-toed shade Trillium luteum is in that classification. Trillium recurvatum, prairie trillium, which is a more demure trillium. It doesn't have a really brightly colored flower. It's much more subdued. And then the actual name species for that classification, Trillium sessile or toad trillium. If you've planted or transplanted woodland wildflowers and they seem to have disappeared, just be patient. Sometimes when they have disturbance, they'll go dormant for a season or more, and it will take them some time to settle in. Also be sure that you're acquiring your plants from a reputable grower or from a reputable rescue. Keep in mind that there are plants that are protected by local, state, or federal laws. And even if they're on your property, you may be prohibited from interfering with those plants, which is why it's always a good thing to go through a reputable grower or to go to a reputable rescue, because there are, I know, Cranbrook has a plant sale every May, and they do have plants that have been rescued from development. So that's a really great resource. A lot of these plants have been poached. I went on a wildflower walk at a park, Tenhaven in Royal Oak, and they had dwarf ginseng. And then I discovered I'd never seen this plant before. It's protected. And I have friends who live up in Rhodes near Midland, went to visit them, and I found that plant on their property. And it was so cool that I could actually go, I know what this is. And I know something about this now. Delicate little thing. Like a gem. Okay, some other spring woodland favorites. These are not ephemerals, and so they have foliage that persists well into the season, and sometimes they modestly rebloom. You don't get a drought for September and October. Actea pachypoda, doll's eyes. There are at least two other species of Actea that are native to Michigan. There's black cohosh. I can't remember what the epithet for black cohosh is. And then Actea rubra, which has red berries. This is called doll's eyes because the fruit is a white berry with a dark spot on it that looks kind of like a doll's eye. You have rather tall foliage, probably about 12 to 15 inches tall, rather divided, and then you have this efflorescence that comes up 20 to 30 inches. And this is what the flowers look like. Aquilegia canadensis, eastern columbine, Flowers usually in conjunction with the return of the ruby-throated hummingbird, although with climate change, these relationships are getting disrupted a lot. This has lovely dissected basal foliage with the flowers coming up easily 24 inches. It's a plant that works really well in the front of the border because even though it's quite tall, it's not massive. It has a wonderful presence. You kind of act like the difference between a blackout curtain and a sheer curtain. We're talking the sheer curtain concept here. Asarum canadense, wild ginger. This is a plant that's really suffered in my yard with the drought these last 2 months. I'm really worried about it. It had really been established well in my front and backyard, and I have no idea what it's going to look like. I'm actually very worried about what will happen next spring because we've had 2 months of drought, which means our woody plants are dehydrated and they have to get through the winter. And they have to have the resources to leaf out in the spring. So I'm trying to maintain my scientific objectivity under the circumstances and see what happens come March, April. I'm quite concerned. This has the Asarum canadense has a heart-shaped leaf. It's satiny. I would never call it glossy. And these small urn-shaped flowers held close to the ground, they're pollinated by beetles and ants, burgundy brown and hairy. There's a little clump of this at Baldock Park in that Aspen Trail area that I can only find if I'm walking the trail a certain direction. I can't find it walking through, heading into, I have to walk backwards to find it. Blue cohosh, Colophyllum thalictroides. There's that thalictroides epithet again. And it's referring to the foliage on this plant, that it looks like meadow roof foliage. Again, basal foliage that may be kind of tall looking, but then the flower comes up above. This is so the pollinators can find it. Usually white or ochre, more or less tinged blue or purple. Really great little plant. I've lost my orchid and I'm very sad, but I did enjoy it and appreciate it for many years. This was a rescue from development that my friend Trish gave me. And I don't know why it went away, but it did. It's amazing how this lady slipper orchid is really not very big, but it's so charismatic that it looks like it should be, you know, a huge corsage. Deep yellow lip, dark brown petals and sepals. Orchids are very specific in their needs. I don't like using the word temperamental. That's a word I use for human beings. I don't use that for plants. They need what they need. They do what they do. It's up to us to accommodate those requirements. I regret its loss. Appreciate it while I had it. Fragaria virginiana, looking for a low maintenance, meaning no maintenance, ground cover. This is the plant for you. I actually got 6 berries off it before the birds got all of them. And I shared them with, actually I shared one with you and Carolyn and Keith each got one. That's right. I remember that now. It was blooming when I had I have an open house in June and in August. Anyone can come see my garden. And Carolyn and Keith came. And I was able to harvest a few berries. And yeah, they're tiny, but boy, are they flavorful. They're delicious. So this is a great plant. Pollination, fruit, covers the ground, and great fall color. The foliage goes burgundy red in the fall. It's fab. Another plant that is great fall color, Geranium maculatum, wild geranium or cranesbill. Called cranesbill because the seed head looks kind of like a crane's bill. Beautiful purpley pinky flowers. You see those wonderful nectar guides guiding the insects into where the pollen and nectar is located. It's a plant that just keeps going all season long. This is one of the plants that during the drought was not as badly affected. They are really tough and beautiful. GM triflorum, prairie smoke. Triflorum refers to the fact that you have 3 flowers together. It's actually called prairie smoke because of this, which is what tells you it's in the buttercup family. Each of those little achenes is attached to a seed, and this seed is dispersed by the wind. Hydrophyllum virginianum, eastern waterleaf, or Virginia waterleaf. I actually discovered this plant at Belle Isle, no, not Belle Isle, sorry, Baldock Park was the first time I saw it, and then I found it at Wild Tech Native Plant Nursery for sale. It has mottled leaves. The name waterleaf comes from the fact that there is mottling on the leaves that make it look like the leaves have water droplets on them. The flowers can range from very, very white, almost, you know, like an ice blue, so ice blue, it's almost white, and up to a deep violet. It does not like drought. So this is a plant that we're gonna see if it comes back for me next year because I'm really worried about what happened to it this fall. Metella diphylla, bishop's cap. This is so tiny. These flowers are so tiny on here. It's called bishop's cap because it looks like a bishop. The flowers look like the cap of a bishop. White coming up. This, you have wonderful basal foliage. These flowers come up. Lovely, lovely, lovely. This is another great ground cover. Pachyra aureus. I call it golden groundsel. Some other people call it golden groundsel. Some people call it golden ragwort. Now you know why I call it golden groundsel. Try selling a plant that has the words snake, spider, wart, weed, rag, bladder, spleen in the common name. It's a hard sell. This is a great plant. If you can see, there's a flower bud tucked in there that's purple. The flower buds on this plant are purple and open to these brilliant yellow flowers. The flower bud, if you look at the flower that's at the bottom left, the one, there's two flowers at the bottom. One it goes straight up and you see that ball that's purplish colored. That's the flower bud. It's purple. This is a complement to yellow in the color wheel. I just find that fascinating. Phlox divaricata, wild blue phlox. One of the two phlox species I've grown on my property. This is a little more specific in its needs as compared to its cousin, the prairie phlox, which seems to be tolerant of a wider range of conditions. You also get rather poor germination on this plant, so it's a little harder to establish a population. If you find the right place for it, it's fabulous. But as I said, it is more specific in its needs. If you want blue and you want something that's a little easier to get something out of, I would suggest spreading Jacob's ladder, Polemonium reptans. And it has, you know, it persists, another great ground cover plant. And this does seed around in my yard, even into my brick walkway. So it's a tough plant and just great to work with. Love it. Polygonatum blyflorum, small Solomon seal. I just love this thing. It's actually related to lily of the valley. So if you think about how the flowers are arranged, it's exactly the same. It's just a much larger form. There's actually a tetraploid version of this plant that's up to 5 feet tall, which I would actually give up another tooth for that if I could find it. I almost had it in my grasp, and I lost touch with the person who said he had it, and I've always regretted that. Really fabulous plant, this one. Elegant. I'm worried about this one too in my yard. Smilacina racemosa, false Solomon seal. Smilacina has now been placed in Myanthemum or Mayflower. So it's now Myanthemum racemosa, along with Myanthemum canadensis, which is the Canada Mayflower, and Myanthemum stellata, which is starry false Solomon seal. Starry false Solomon seal can be pretty successful. Just straight up false Solomon seal is a little less aggressive. The reason it's called false Solomon, you know, we just saw true Solomon seal, and you see that the flowers are very differently arranged. You have a terminal efflorescence with the false Solomon seal, and you have the flowers along the stem on the true Solomon seal. The Solomon seal name comes from, if you take the leaf off the stem, you'll see this mark that supposedly looks like the seal of Solomon. I can't vouch for that. And the plants do look very similar aside from their efflorescences. This is a little past its prime, but that's starry fault salmon seal. Styloforum diphyllum celandine poppy. I now prefer to refer to this as woodland poppy because of the issues with an extremely invasive exotic plant called the lesser celandine, which also has yellow flowers. This is a scourge along our smaller waterways in Michigan. My friend Deb up in Birmingham, there's a little stream that goes behind her property where she has been working to eliminate this plant, this lesser celandine. This is the native poppy. The cool thing about this plant is the sap of this plant is as sulfurously yellow as those petals. It's just so cool. And it's a true poppy. And like oriental poppies, it'll come up in the spring, flower, and then it might get kind of nasty looking. If you've ever grown oriental poppies, they go through this period where they look like you want to interplant a lot, okay? But then they'll come up again and they're photosynthesizing to store energy to be able to go to sleep for the winter, come back up and flower. These guys do the same thing, but they can flower in the fall if we don't have a drought. Tiarella cordifolia, variety cordifolia running foam flower. This is a plant that was used to hybridize with heuchera species to come up with heucherellas. I don't like that. This is another great ground cover if you can find the right place for it. Usually white flowers, sometimes can flush a little bit pink. Pretty good range on this plant. Ovularia grandiflora, large flowered bellwort. There's at least one other Ovularia species native to Michigan, but I've had a hard time finding it to grow. I've seen this suggested by William Kalina as a ground cover. It's not a ground cover that you're going to be running around on. It's going to be a ground cover that it fills in a beautiful space with these lovely flowers and this persistent foliage. And viola species. I've grown, I think, 6 or 8 violet species on my property native to Michigan. This is, I think, Viola rostrata or longspur violet. I've grown Sororia, Pedata, Sagittaria, Labradorica, Pubescens, Canadensis, I don't even know all of them anymore. And you can see on these, you can see the nectar guides to help the insects find the nectar and pollen. Violas have a really cool reproductive strategy. So these pretty flowers, those are intended for insect pollination to assist in cross-pollination, to assist in the genetic diversity of the species as a whole. But should you fail to get pollination through insect activity, what violets do is they set cleistogamous flowers, which are inconspicuous, held under the leaves, and it's a form of parthenogenic reproduction, which means this plant is reproducing, it's producing seed to generate a plant that is genetically identical to itself, to get that material out there and exponentially increase its chances of successfully crossing with another member of its species next year. It's nothing like having a backup plan. This is pubescens or yellow forest violet. There's a lot of this at Baldock Park in with the spring beauty and yellow trout lily. And this is white violet or Canada violet. And we have some woody plants that bloom. Pussy willow, Salix discolor in the spring. And serviceberry, Amelancher species. There's 2 species, Lavis and, oh gosh, the other one's got out of my head.
Leve?
Pardon?
Leve?
That's the one, that Lavis and, I can't remember the other one. Earliest blooming fruiting plant, robins, thrushes, thrashers. Robins are actually thrushes, love serviceberry. Squirrels love serviceberry. They jump all over it. They love it. I sometimes can get a quart or so off my tree before they get them all. And they're delicious. They taste like a cross between a raspberry and a blueberry. Make a great pie. Follow like a blueberry pie recipe. put some nutmeg in there. I don't share that.
I think the other species may be Arborea.
Arborea,
Arborea, yeah.
thank you, thank you. Oh, don't listen to that, don't look at that. Okay. Questions, do we have questions?
Before we get to questions in the room, Derek Schaffer, one of our Wild Winds members, popped on for a minute and he just left a comment that Virginia waterleaf is deer-proof.
Is deer, oh, cool, thank you.
Mhm.
So Virginia waterleaf is deer proof. Who knew? Yes, good. So is Virginia creeper. Other questions? Yes,
I've been watering my garden up to just a week or so. We started to get the light rains. So that might not be the best thing to do, but I don't want to lose my plants, so I water everything. So I have budget for water and I just use it, so my garden was beautiful all this fall, so we just had this hard frost these last couple of days. Everything was fully leafed, fleshy, filling color, and now, of course, the last couple of days, everything was almost brown.
yeah.
Is that bad?
You know, I don't see, from a scientific standpoint, I want to know what the repercussions are going to be. I had an interesting experience back in September because what I do is I take my hose, I don't use a sprinkler, but I'll take my hose and I'll stick it in a part of my yard before I go to bed at night, and I'll leave the water on, just trickling, you know? And I got a call from the Detroit Water and Sewage Department saying that they thought I had a leak because I was water going during the night. And I'm like, okay, did you see water going during the day? Crickets. Okay, if it's not going 24/7, it's not likely to be a leak because a leak would be going all the time, not just at night. Okay, that's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer is I'm watering at night because that's when demand is lowest. I'm not going to be affecting what other people are trying to do. They called me again. I called them back and explained this to them, and then they sent me another notice. You're like, yes, I know. It got to be a bit much, but I think they finally figured out that I'm doing something a little different. I didn't want to, I'm not arguing with what you did or faulting it at all. In fact, it may be very useful to see what happens for you versus someone who didn't do that. Because it could educate us on how can we handle this going forward, because we're going to have continuing disruptions. I mean, there is no normal anymore. There is no normal. Normal is a setting on the dryer. That's the only place I have found the word normal in the entire universe that I know of. So, you know, let's see what happens. Any other questions from the Zoom audience?
I don't see any Zoom questions. I've been watching for raised hands, and as always, you can also enter your question in the chat. Yes, yes.
So what are some of the best places that you're aware of?
Well, Baldock is a good place.
What is it?
Baldock Park
Olive Park?
on the east side of Detroit,
Okay.
near, it's actually in Cornerstone neighborhood. It's actually really close to I-94. There's some fabulous stuff at Rouge Park. Peggy knows all about that. She actually took me, we did some botanizing. That was before when was that? That's right when I had adopted Tammy. That was before the pandemic, wasn't it? I can't, hang on a second, let me think a minute. Maybe it wasn't, maybe it was just after, maybe that was in 2021 that you took me through a part of Rouge Park and saw amazing stuff in there. I think there's probably stuff to see at Belle Isle, but I don't know what the conditions are there. I used to lead wildflower walks on Belle Isle every May until registration got down to low single digits. And I'm willing to do those things. I'm willing to do, I did wildflower walks at Baldock too, and I'm willing to do those things if an organization books me to do it. But I used to do them through the Detroit Garden Center, which no longer exists, and we use it as a fundraiser for them. I get a speaker's fee. When they stopped existing, I continued to do it because there seemed to be an interest, and I was donating a portion of my proceeds to the Wildflower Association of Michigan, of which I'm a member. But it's been hard to keep that audience going. I don't know why exactly. If you want, one place I haven't been out to, oh, okay, skunk cabbage, Seven Ponds Nature Center. Amazing skunk cabbage, other water's edge plants there. If you want to see skunk cabbage, go in April. It's amazing. It's a really extraordinary plant. It actually, through a chemical process, melts the snow around itself. And, you know, it's called skunk cabbage for a good reason. And it's another plant that's pollinated by flies. Is that helpful? But you know, that's a really good question. On my website, I'm at www.blackcatpottery.com. If you go to the archive page, there's some what I think are some useful documents on there. I have 3 little free libraries on my property for children, young adults, and adults, with books relating to sustainability and habitat and that sort of thing. And the permanent book list is one of the documents on that page. Please don't fault me for it not being comprehensive. I do the best I can. One of the things I'm really proud of, I came across an educator who had a great list of books relating to the disconnection between nature and people of color. So there are some books listed on there that are specifically relating to DEI issues. There is a document about plants for birds that support birds, native species, in terms of food for adults, food for babies, nesting context, nesting materials. It's a table document. I went through, during the pandemic, I went through 6 books by John Eastman, who's now deceased, and the books are out of print, unfortunately, and just mined material out of that to put into this document so people could start. Because if you're feeding the birds, you're feeding everybody. If you're providing for the birds, you're providing for the insects, you're providing for the mammals, you've got it covered. The 3rd document on there is a list of native plant purveyors in Michigan. And it has their name, their address, their phone number, their website, their email, any other additional information. Keep in mind that a lot of these growers are growing on their private properties. They're not like English Gardens or your local garden center. So you want to check and make sure when they're open. They might have specific scheduled open days. They might let you make an appointment to visit. But that's something that I collaborated with Bill Schneider out at Wild Tape Native Plant Nursery in Mason, Michigan. We worked on that together. So there's some, but I think, you know, you're bringing up this idea of places for people to see this stuff. You know, accessibility, that would be a really great thing to add, to create that kind of, and all that free time I have. But I should get to work on that. That's a really good question. Thank you. Yes.
What are your go-to plant providers for spring ephemerals? They're not often available.
That's right. Yeah, purveyors of native plants of spring ephemerals. Wild Type Native Plant Nursery does sometimes have a limited selection. Some of the plants I talked about today, they do have for sale. Sometimes they're going to be dormant, so you're going to see an apparently empty pot, but it's not empty. It's just gone to sleep. Another really great resource is Wild Ginger Woodlands. I think she's out of Holt, and actually she is going to be at my open house on June 20th. Next year. When I do my open houses, I try to bring in a purveyor of native plants. I try to bring in a plein air painter. My friend Rebecca's going to be painting in my garden. My friend Brian painted in August that I finally made the final payment on, and I'll be able to get that soon. And the other thing that I do is I partner with Motor City Possum Rescue. They're a DNR approved wildlife rescue. Putting my hand right over them, like Cheryl, really good. They focus on squirrels, coons, bunnies, possums. I think that's the main ones they do. And I was actually a release sponsor for 3 orphaned gray squirrels in August. And the habitat was still on my property when I had my open house. And they had a representative there to talk to people about what we're doing in terms of releasing these rescued babies. And so I've actually spoken with them and made arrangements that we'll be able to do the same thing next year to continue doing the public outreach so people are educated about what this is about and about being compassionate about the organisms with which we share the planet.
We have a question from online from JB who asks, what's this about plants for Black folk and where can I find the list? I only caught the end of your statement.
I help with a space at the Belle Isle Art Fair called the Secret Garden. And when we did this last year, we solicited some speakers, and one of them was, oh God, Dr. Campbell. Don't ask me what her first name is, it's gone out of my head. And she is the doyen of birding in Southeast Michigan. And she is a person of color. And she has this website called BIPOC Birding that she referred me to. And there was a list of books relating to the disconnect between people of color and access to nature. And I mined that to find resources because I live in the city of Detroit. I live in a Black majority community. And this is an underserved community. We know this in terms of native plants. How many Black people are in this room?
0.
Yeah, that's the thing. When I do the WAM conference as a vendor and as an attendee, overwhelmingly white. There is a huge disconnect. When I used to volunteer with the Greening of Detroit to do tree plantings, my 2 big bones to pick with them was for the tree sale, they were not offering native plants. And the pushback I got was people don't know what to do with them. And the pushback I gave back was, isn't part of our mission to educate people?
Aren't they the same as any other trees or flowers?
Yeah, okay. And the other issue I had was everyone on the trees committee was white. And we, this is not the community we're serving. We're not living in Detroit, okay? Great for volunteering, but people representing the people we're trying to serve. And they're just not getting the representation. There's some really great, there's one book called Black and Brown Faces in America's Wild Spaces, I think it's something like that. And there's actually a booklet that went with that is for young adults. Because we need to show that there are people that look like you doing this. One of my agendas with my children's library is to have books that are representative of the people who live in my neighborhood. And until about 3 years ago, it was really hard to find that material, and it's getting better. Much, much better. And it's, people of color, women doing cool things. There's a great book about a young boy in Mali who built a windmill to power his village and generate water. There's a book about a man who reforested an island in the Brahmaputra River in India, and now there are tigers and elephants there. It was barren. These are everyday people doing amazing things. And any one of them, any one of the kids in my neighborhood could be that person. And I want them to have the inspiration to be that person. Other questions? Yes.
Probably ephemerals
She's asking me if I've tried to propagate any ephemerals from seed. No. I report to 6 cats. I have a pottery business, I have a gardening business, I have a house, you know, and it's just like, in my yard, go for it.
The reason I ask is it's so that, you know, I read and I learn that it's more tricky. I've done a little myself.
How much luck have you had?
Well, I got some Jack help.
That's great.
I collected some seed from libraries that volunteered in my yard,
Mm-hmm,
so I'll see how that goes.
mm-hmm,
But you know, some people say, a lot of people say you have to plant the seed right away. You can't, you know, try to store it or try to stratify it.
right.
It's just trickier to do. But I did grow some also in my dream. I have to check on some I have stored because last year in November, it started to sprout in the fridge. And
Wait, no, don't do that.
So I did, grow and conserve. And I actually got valuable plants out that I planted. You know, it's just all tricky, so
I don't have any. I'm wondering if I've inadvertently done anything. No, I don't even want to claim that. Things have propagated in my yard. And that's, you know, people, when I used to have 80 clematis species and varieties in my yard. Was a big clematarian. And people were to ask me, you know, I'm like, you know, there's a part of me that would love to open a nursery. Again, all that spare time. You know, it's a lot of work, and you know, the thing is, it's very rewarding. But it's also very time consuming. You know, so I'm impressed with what you've accomplished. That's fabulous. Good for you. And I don't know if you were to come to my open house, I don't know that Sally will be there, but her associate, I think her name is Cindy, will be there. My experience with people who are in this community, they are interested in sharing their experience and they want other people to succeed. Sally's last name is Garrod, Garrod. She is on Facebook. I actually really like her. I got a chance to talk with her back in June. She's a really neat lady. It was one of those conversations where it's like, shoot, I have to go to this other nursery. My appointment's in 20 minutes and it's 30 minutes from here. I wish I could talk longer. And she's like, yeah, dang. She's really cool. I like her. Anyone else?
We had a comment from Diana McCormick, said she tried spring beauties and hepatica from seeds, but they did not make it.
Okay, so spring beauties, Diane McCormick tried spring beauties and hepatica without success. So they, I think, are more specific. And this is one of the reasons, you know, there's, you know, the whole thing, they're temperamental. No, they need certain things and we haven't figured them out yet. And the other thing that, you know, when even Bill, who's been doing this for decades, with not even with woodland plants, there are years that seed for certain species just isn't viable. Just doesn't germinate. Who knows? It's just one of those things. Why? I don't know. They don't know. It doesn't, it's like that. That's kind of what I get. It's kind of like computer weirdness. Just, you know, it's my explanation for anything that goes wrong on the computer. Computer weirdness.
I call it gremlins.
Same thing, you know? So, you know, sometimes we can crack the code, but the code seems to vary a lot. And might not be transferable to something else. Other questions?
We have a comment from Sonia S. online. She says, Sally is great. I met her a couple of months ago at her house nursery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's fab. I think I know Sonia. All set? Thank you so much.
All right, online friends, we are going to transition over to the business part of our members meeting and with some announcements. So I'm going to go ahead and hand the microphone off to Bob. And then I will turn the camera so that you can see him.
We'll go right here.
You can go right there. That's fine.
You see me?
Yep.
All right, thank you. We'll try to get through the business part quickly and then get everybody on their way. First, I'd like to say happy Veterans Day to our veterans out in our membership. I know at least one other veteran other than myself, I'm sure members have spouses and family members, pardon me? Oh, okay, two. But I know the veterans, whether in peacetime or conflict, made a lot of sacrifices, family sacrifices, personal sacrifices. So thank you for those sacrifices and stepping up. Secondly, I'm going to introduce Mike here in a minute. He is going to be part of our, he's heading our grant and fundraising committee. That's something that we're very excited about in 2026. We need other sources of income, and there are projects that we need funding for. And aside from monetary resources needed for those projects, we need volunteers. We have, at last count, we had 96 people, and this isn't your grandma's garden club anymore. Wild Ones is actually out there advocating for sustainable landscaping using native plants. We're out there, we're trying to influence people socially, and we need everyone in the chapter to do that. Especially if we intend on applying for grants. Those grants want us to detail who's going to be working on those grants, who's going to be maintaining those areas that we have grants for after the fact. So we really need everybody to contribute. And as I said before, you only need to volunteer 1 hour a week. Everybody can volunteer 1 hour a week. If we had 1 hour a week from everybody, that's 96 hours. We'll make it work. We'll make your 1 hour work. Just let us know what you would like to do, and we can fit you in there. So thank you very much. And now, oh, pardon me?
I get because we need to do what you're saying, I get to mention some of the positions.
Oh, yes. There you go.
Okay, so I sent out an email, the election period, we wanted to have the nominations in by today. We did get, after I sent the email, we did get someone running for the vice president position. So I currently hold that position. I'm moving on to some other endeavors, even though I get help with stuff. So we have a nomination for that position, Patrick Corey. If you've gone to our member tours, we've actually gone to his house twice. Little garden, no grass. And then he's getting rid of all the buckthorn in his backyard, fall guy. So sure, just to refresh your memory about who Patrick Corey is. And anyone else that may be interested in running for these positions, the deadline was today. If you could please if you want to run for these positions, please let us know by this evening so we can open up the voting. And then a couple of roles, I was mentioning that, we can, there's ways to help for just singular events or just help for like an hour a month, an hour a week if you have it. Okay, so some of the other positions that we want to fill is the programs chair. So this would be somebody that helped with coordinating speakers and other events. We would love, and like Cheryl English had mentioned, representation is good. So someone that like has a good network, that would be wonderful. If you can help us in locating speakers, even if you don't want the chair position, if you have ideas for speakers, please email us. The volunteer coordinator, so that role has been filled. The volunteer coordinator and the refreshments for our meetings like this evening have been filled by Donna, and she's done an excellent job. However, she has many jobs, so she's also doing a lot of work with the Seeds of the Community. So we're looking to fill that role of someone to coordinate volunteers for events. And someone to bring refreshments or even just organize refreshments. It could be simple. And oh, and then one more, last but not least, we have 2 secretaries and one of the secretaries wants to change out of that position, so we need another, we could use another co-secretary, so Sue is gonna leave that role. And we would, we're looking for someone else to help, our other secretary, Katie Gillis out. So that is it, and then if there's other ways that you think of that you can help, then please reach out, let us know. And I'm gonna hand it over to Mike Quick.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody out there. As you heard from Bob, a new endeavor with the club is to try to win grant awards, and to do that, we have to have a more formal structure. Structure right now of the club is very good for the things that we're doing, but we need more specifics if we're gonna go for grants, and I put together this volunteer interest and capability survey that went out to membership today. I'm not sure it went to everybody.
Yes.
Was everybody?
It was everybody, even, yes.
Okay, and so, you know, I'd like you to take a moment, look through that and see what functions you think you could do. When we do find grants that, the club, that meet the club's mission statement, and we'll announce those when we find them. But we need to have a sort of a formal structure, because there's accountability, more accountability with grants than there is with just volunteer work. And we just need to have a little bit more formal structure, know who can do what, when they can do it, and that way we can be more successful. So appreciate if everybody would take a look at that, contact me, contact Katie, contact any of the board members in the club, and we'll look this all up. Thank you very much.
Another thing I forgot to mention, Evan with the Habitat Stewardship Committee, so Rob Ones is gonna join the coalition to save, Sitka Prairie. Unfortunately, I forgot I posted that after I printed it out tonight. But, so then if you wanna help with that in some way, he's gonna be working on that. And that's another thing, like, they could get a grant and we can help, you know, in that arena. And that's it. Bob's picking up.
Online, yeah, online.
Really, okay. I just want to make sure we introduced our new membership chair, Cheryl M. So she may hear her as well for other ways to reach out. I think that's it.
I think so.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close out the meeting now. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we will see you at our next meeting. Have a great evening.